HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Five Nickels, true story of the Desert Storm heroics and sacrifice of Air Force Captain Steve Phillis by Jim Boots Demarest. Read by Tom Parks. Prologue. The Shootdown. Captain Steve Phillis launched on his 30th combat mission of Operation Desert Storm on February 15, 1991. A highly experienced Air Force A-10 fighter pilot, Steve was leading his two-ship formation, call sign Enfield 37, on their most challenging mission of the war, attacking Saddam Hussein's elite Medina Division of the Republican Guard. The Medina were dug in 100 miles north of the border between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and they were equipped with Iraq's most modern air defense equipment. It was tough tasking, but Steve and his wingman were quietly confident in their ability to get the job done. Steve's wingman was First Lieutenant Rob Sweet, a young A-10 pilot who had grown up fast during Desert Storm and showed talent well beyond his years and experience. Rob and Steve flew as a combat pair during the war, and both had experience being shot at by Iraqi forces. To thrive and survive, each pilot had specific mission responsibilities. Steve's duties as flight lead were clear: drop bombs on target and bring both aircraft safely back to base. Rob's job as wingman was to follow Steve's lead and support his efforts to get both of them back home safely. After a month of combat flying, both understood the risks they would face. The Medina Division endured regular aerial bombing by a host of coalition attack aircraft, yet maintained an 85% combat effectiveness rating, according to intelligence analysts. Over the preceding few days, the air attacks had intensified, and February 15th was no exception. It was late in the afternoon when the Iraqi commander ordered several soldiers from his air defense company to man their Soviet-built SA-13 Gopher/Strela-10 surface-to-air missile SAM system mounted on a tracked armored vehicle. Most of the chassis was buried in the sand, leaving only the hatches, gunner's window, steerable turret, and missile canisters exposed. They would get little notice of an attack. All the early warning radars were either destroyed or turned off to prevent engagement by a coalition aircraft. Any advance warning would arrive via information passed through a vast network of underground telephones, or, as was more often the case, the crew simply relied on their eyes and ears to locate enemy aircraft. Several soldiers took up lookout positions around the SA-13, while the commander, gunner, and driver stood ready. All had clear orders: attack any coalition aircraft that strayed within the SA-13's 3-mile range. Enfield 37 flight entered the kill box occupied by the Medina Division. Steve and Rob took turns dropping bombs on military equipment and vehicles, with one attacking targets while the other watched out for SAM launches. They had seen several launches in the area and heard plenty of radio chatter from aircraft frantically maneuvering to prevent getting shot down. Their A-10s were well equipped to defend against SAMs, but neither was eager to put these systems to use. After several bombing passes, Steve noticed a truck traveling southwest on the only road in the area, so he and Rob followed. Steve rolled in and strafed the truck with the A-10's 30mm cannon, but missed. The truck raced off the road and pulled into the center of a small circle of trucks parked on the south side. Rob rolled in and dropped cluster bombs on the truck park and covered about half the circle with bomblets. Steve called out that they had been in this target area long enough and directed the flight eastbound. Through the smoke belching from burning vehicles and oil fires and the dust constantly kicked up by desert winds and coalition bombs, an Iraqi soldier spied two black dots approaching his position. Unable to initially identify these objects, of one thing he was sure: They were not Iraqi aircraft. He watched as the dots grew bigger and now suspected his unit was in for more trouble. His fears were confirmed when the dots, now identified as aircraft, began to dive and drop bombs near his position. While not in the direct line of fire, he was close enough to see what was happening. His unit was being attacked from the air yet again. The initial attack was out of range of their SA-13s. However, after delivering their bombs, the aircraft circled back to attack a closer position. The commander ordered his team into their armored vehicle, and all three raced across the desert sand with an unmistakable sense of urgency. The driver hopped into the open front left hatch and reached over to start the engine. Once running, it would drive the internal generator used to power the entire weapons system. He reached up to close and lock the hatch behind him and turned on the generator. The system would be powered up in less than 5 seconds. Next in was the gunner, who scampered down the front right hatch and moved quickly through the tight space back to his firing position. He unlocked the turret and placed his hands on the steering and fire controls, and began searching for the target through the blast-proof glass in front of him. The commander entered just behind the gunner, then reached up to close and lock the hatch. He confirmed both hatches and the window were locked, which was a requirement to launch. He put his headset on and activated the intercom, listening for words from his gunner. The gunner looked down to confirm the combat light was on steady and moved his thumbs over the push buttons atop the turret controls. He spun the turret to the south and continued looking for any coalition aircraft, eager to shoot one down with his Arrow missile. The Arrow was a 7-foot-long, 86-pound missile designed to destroy high-performance aircraft at low altitude. The single-stage, solid-propellant rocket motor boosted the missile to speeds in excess of 1,200 miles per hour, and its thin, white smoke trail was difficult to see from the air. While flying eastbound, Steve spotted a lucrative target of riveted tanks in a 3-mile-wide circle. There were no bomb craters anywhere in the formation, indicating that this unit had not come under recent attack in its present location. At first, Steve wondered whether he should even attack these targets for fear that they were decoys. He decided to reposition the flight for what Rob believed to be their final attack, unaware of the flurry of activity going on below them. The clear, late-afternoon sky provided perfect conditions and allowed the gunner to select this preferred targeting mode, optical tracking. High above his position, he spied a black dot slowly tracking across the sky and repositioned the launcher for a better look. He could not tell at first if it was an aircraft, but once he saw the unmistakable glow of a bright red flare in the late-afternoon sky, he knew it was an aircraft, and a military aircraft at that. The gunner watched as the aircraft drew closer, and he centered the target in the course sight, a mechanical reticle mounted near the top of his window. Once centered, he leaned forward and placed his head on the forehead pad to peer through the eyepiece. There, he found the crosshair used for visual aiming and located the target. He could make out the shape of a cross, which could only mean one thing. He was looking at a Bundukiat Samita, a silent gun, the Iraqi's name for an American A-10 Warthog. He pressed down on the button under his left thumb to command missile bore sight mode. The fire control system sent a 30-volt charge to the missile, which spun up gyros in the seeker head and readied it for target tracking. The gunner noted the bore sight light on, heard the low-pitched beep in the headset meaning system ready, and looked down to find the tracking circle in his sight. He was able to smoothly track the slow-moving target circling overhead and centered it in his crosshairs. Now he pressed down the button under his right thumb to the first stop to command missile tracking. The electromagnets holding the lid closed over missile number 1 energized to open, uncovering the seeker and allowing the missile to look for a target. The blue sky provided nice contrast for optical tracking of the dark silhouette, and as the gunner followed the target, he heard a low-pitched sound in his headset telling him missile number 1 was seeing the target. The gunner centered his crosshairs over the A-10 and watched as the missile locked on and started tracking. The tone in his headset switched to a high-pitched sound, and he could see the tracking circle following the target through his field of view. Missile tracking confirmed, he kept the crosshairs over the target to ensure missile tracking at launch. Before launching, the gunner had to ensure the target was within range, because the seeker could see the target long before the missile could reach it. The gunner used scale markings on the crosshairs, comparing them to the dimensions of the A-10 he'd memorized, concluded his target was below 10,000 feet and well within the 3-mile maximum engagement range of his arrow. Once in range and tracking, the gunner called "target capture" over the intercom, and the commander responded with "fire." On command, the gunner pressed the tracking/fire button under his right thumb to the second stop and held it down. The fire control system shot an electrical charge to the missile, which set off an igniter to start the missile battery and quickly ready the missile for launch. A second later, the onboard battery came up to voltage and all missile systems were switched to internal power. In a split second, the missile confirmed launch requirements were met and sent a signal for rocket motor ignition. The missile erupted in a fury of smoke and flames as it exploded out of its canister. The crew heard the muffled blast and was momentarily blinded by the bright flash and cloud of white smoke from the rocket motor. The missile climbed skyward and tracked toward the target. It would only take seconds to get there. The missile detonated just underneath the A-10's tail, and the warhead exploded with a flash of high-velocity shrapnel. Shrapnel penetrated the aircraft's skin, damaging or destroying anything in its path. Some effects were immediate, while others would take time to show themselves. Back on the ground, there were cheers, followed by machine gun fire into the air in celebration. When black smoke was seen trailing behind the now erratically flying silent gun, the missile crew knew for certain they had just made a contribution to Iraq's war effort. At the moment, it seemed like at least one of the A-10s in Enfield 37 flight would not make it back to base in time for dinner. Part 1. The Strong-Willed Child. Stephen Richard Phillis. Dr. Richard, Bud, and Diane Phillis welcomed their first of 5 children, Stephen Richard, on May 17, 1960, at the Illinois Research and Educational Hospital in Chicago. Bud had just graduated from medical school and earned $75 every 2 weeks as an intern. So adding a new mouth to feed was no small matter. Complicating life further was the fact that Steve was a very colicky baby who screamed day and night for the first 6 weeks of his life. While the screaming eventually stopped, the challenges of parenting him did not. Steve was a stubborn and obstinate baby, the epitome of Dr. James Dobson's strong-willed child. Nothing was easy with young Steve, and everything Bud and Diane tried to do was met with some level of resistance. Long working hours afforded the young family little sleep, and although Bud and Diane knew Steve's strong will would serve him well one day, that day could not come soon enough. When Steve was 6 years old, Bud was drafted into the Army, but decided he wanted to go into the Air Force instead. In true Phillis fashion, when he was unable to convince the local authorities about the wisdom of his way, he purchased an airline ticket and flew to Randolph Air Force Base to talk to the Surgeon General of the Air Force. After a 15-minute conversation, Bud got assigned to the Air Force at F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and showed up weeks later as an Air Force doctor with no military training, just his usual crew cut and a set of orders. Life in Cheyenne was great for the family, as Steve learned to ski and ride horses. But life out west was not without challenges. When Steve was in the first grade, he decided things were so bad at home that he needed to run away. He packed a lunch, along with several prized possessions, and ran away to live underneath the bleachers at the parade grounds, which, while in full view of the Phillis home, was a long way for a first grader to go. After a few hours, he returned home, and Diane later learned that when Steve heard that a friend of his was considering running away from home too, Steve told him not to do it because it wouldn't be much fun. Rock Island. Life as an Air Force doctor was simple, but Bud found it professionally unchallenging. So he was delighted to complete his required 2-year tour, then return home to Rock Island, Illinois. The Phillis family moved into a house large enough to hold Steve, his sister Kathy, and their younger brothers Mike, Tom, and Tim. They spent a lot of time together as a family and were regulars at the Sacred Heart Church. Growing up, Steve's room was completely green, his favorite color. He had a collection of model airplanes and tanks that he built in excruciating detail, and he liked to play war with his brother Tom. Of course, older brother Steve would always win. Playing war did not involve guns, as they were not part of the Phillis household. Nor was fighting, which was absolutely not tolerated, so the kids never fought. There were, of course, disagreements, but they were never reduced to blows. Steve didn't waste a lot of time trying to impress people. He was more of a quiet, confident kid. He was not the kind of person that sat around and chose his words carefully. He didn't have to. He knew what he wanted to say and just said it. He was the perfect fit for his Rock Island home and neighborhood. Leading the way. Steve was raised in a home with strong Catholic values. He served as an altar boy, as did his 3 brothers, and his love of music led him to join the church choir. His talents as a teacher emerged early when he was placed in charge of altar boy classes, because he hated it when an altar boy stood up during the service and didn't know what to do. Steve's strong will evolved into strong leadership skills, and he was always up for a challenge. If a group needed a leader, he was the first to step forward and take charge. The front yard of the Phillis house was the neighborhood playground. The kids were always playing some kind of team game, and Steve would always be a team captain. Everyone wanted to win, which meant that the same kids were always picked last, and Steve knew who was going to get picked last. One day, the kids decided to play a soccer game. All of the good athletes wanted to be on the same team, so Steve decided to captain the other team. He pulled them together, coached them up, and against all odds, they won. His brother Tom said it best. Steve just had this way of bringing out the best in people, and it didn't matter if you weren't good at something or if you weren't athletic. Steve gave everyone else the opportunity to be better. Indeed, sports played a big part in Steve's life, but only if played the right way. Steve was raised in a family where sportsmanship counted more than winning. If someone lost and got upset for losing, they were done for that day. Likewise, if they won, humility was the key. Rubbing a loss in somebody's face was simply not tolerated. Plain and simple, it was sportsmanship. Steve put this skill to the test as a high school football player, playing running back and defensive back. He was a good athlete, and in fact, good at most things. He played trumpet, was a member of the National Honor Society, and ended up as the senior class salutatorian. A calling. As high school graduation approached, Steve felt a calling to serve in the military, something that was not pushed in the Phillis household, nor was it frowned upon. Rather, Steve's parents gave him the gift of choice and helped him gather information about military service options. Steve cast a wide net, competing for and earning Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC scholarships from the Air Force and Navy. But his sights were set higher, over a mile higher, in fact. Steve wanted to attend the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado. The application process for the Air Force Academy was long and grueling, but Steve's dreams were best expressed in a letter dated September 20th, 1977, he sent to Congressman Tom Railsback seeking a nomination. Dear Mr. Railsback, it is my desire to attend the Air Force Academy and to serve in the United States Air Force. I respectfully request that I be considered as one of your nominees for the class that enters the Academy in June 1978. My reasons for wanting to enter the Air Force Academy are: I believe that every American has the duty to serve his country. I also believe in discipline. At the Air Force Academy, I will not only receive my education, but will also be trained in self-discipline that will be of value all throughout my life. I also enjoy physical activity and conditioning. The Academy not only emphasizes mental exercise, but physical conditioning as well. All throughout my life, I have wanted to learn to fly jet aircraft. In the Air Force Academy, I would not only be well trained as a pilot, but also be given ample opportunity to receive flying as a great experience. After months of waiting, Steve received a brief reply in the mail from the Academy. Dear Mr. Phillis, I am pleased to offer you an appointment to the U.S. Air Force Academy as a member of the class of 1982. This appointment is the first step toward a challenging and rewarding career as a professional Air Force officer. Congratulations. Sincerely, K. L. Tallman, Lieutenant General, United States Air Force, Superintendent. Part 2. The Academy. The Blue Zoo. In June of 1978, the Phillis family set out on a journey known to many. They were dropping off their oldest child at college. But this was no ordinary family trip to any ordinary college. It was a camping trip from Rock Island to Colorado Springs to deliver eldest child Steve to the United States Air Force Academy. The family piled into their station wagon, laden with 2 weeks' worth of equipment and clothes, all of Steve's earthly possessions, and towing a camper. It was quite a sight. The Phillis family left at 4 in the morning and planned to drive straight through each day with the only stops for gas. The kids were warned not to drink too much because Dad would not tolerate any extra stops. Diane packed a huge cooler with sandwiches for lunch and had absolutely everything you could possibly want for snacks. Everyone knew the trip was a milestone for the family that not all were looking forward to. No one talked about Steve leaving, but it was on everyone's mind. Bud and Diane shared feelings of loss and uncertainty, particularly as they thought about Steve marching off into the unknown. June 26th was a beautiful summer day in Colorado Springs, and the clear sky at 7,000 feet above sea level made the sun almost blinding. The Air Force Academy's modern architecture stood in stark contrast to the jagged mountains of the Rampart Range that rose in the northwestern corner of Colorado Springs. Known by some as the Blue Zoo, the Academy's mission was to prepare young men and women of character to serve as officers in the United States Air Force. The family car, still filled beyond capacity, was directed from the Academy's south gate through a series of winding roads which rose to the cadet area, Steve's destination. Steve was one of the 1,475 young men and women ordered to report for their first day of duty, and the scene was organized chaos. The Phillis family pulled up into the unloading zone where, after a brief goodbye, Steve was organized into a group with a dozen of his new classmates, all dressed in the fashions of the late 70s, with hair to match. They were met by upper-class cadets wearing impeccably pressed uniforms and white gloves. The new cadets were lined up, taught how to stand at attention, and given a brief marching lesson. They then marched off into the uncertainty of the academy, where their civilian identities were replaced with the uniforms of a basic cadet. The family would get one more chance to see Steve later that afternoon. The swearing-in ceremony was held at the cadet field house, and the Phillis family arrived in plenty of time, as instructed. Inside, they found letters in alphabetical order taped to the backs of the seats, indicating where they might find their new cadet. The field house was a sea of light blue shirts, dark blue pants and skirts, and mostly bald heads. After the swearing-in ceremony, the family finally found Steve with his head shaved and dressed like everybody else. It was a shock to everyone. The family spent a few awkward moments finding out what Steve had just been through, but the truth was that everyone was coming to grips with something much more profound. The home in Rock Island would be without its oldest son from now on. Steve's sister and brother Tom cried at the thought, and his family watched him disappear into a mass of blue humanity when he was directed by an authoritative voice over the loudspeaker, "All basic cadets report to the cadet area." In a moment, both his civilian identity and youth were gone. Beast. Basic Cadet Training, known as BCT or BEAST, was the Academy's program to transition teenage civilians into young military officer candidates. It was the Air Force Academy's version of boot camp, and with it came all that boot camp has to offer. Highly regimented days and nights, marching, drilling with rifles, physical fitness training, honor code training, marksmanship, assault course, and indoctrination into the Academy's fourth-class system with its emphasis on discipline. Beast was both a physical and mental challenge, and dozens of prospective members of the class of 1982 left before Beast was over. This would be the first of many hurdles that Steve would have to clear in his 4 years at the Academy. His family knew that Steve was thriving in the pressure of the Academy, and had no doubt that he would graduate 4 years later unless he decided to do something else. Dobson's strong-willed child was not about to let anything get in the way of his dreams. He did so well, he was presented the Air Force Cadet Wing Outstanding Achievement Award for superior performance in BCT. Good start. Dually life. Freshmen at the Academy are called doolies, derived from the Greek word for slave. Dually life was a seemingly never-ending series of challenges. Academics, intramurals, inspections, parades, formations, football games, and military training filled every waking moment. Steve didn't love dually life, and got especially upset when a close friend of his dropped out of the Academy. To cope, Steve started dipping tobacco. An Academy friend got him started on beechnut, and he went from there to Copenhagen, which he would dip for the rest of his life, and his mom hated it. Steve was not a casual dipper. He would put in a dip of Copenhagen in the morning and never spit. He would swallow the tobacco juice and keep a dip in all day and night. It was just something he did. Steve struggled, but managed to finish dually year and was rewarded with a 3-week summer training program called SEER, which stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. Conducted in a remote part of the Academy grounds, SEER taught survival techniques, including a prisoner of war, POW environment. The resistance portion subjected Steve to a controlled but realistic POW environment similar to that found by American POWs in Vietnam. Of course, cadets were spared the extreme physical torture and traumas that actual POWs faced, but they were given a pretty healthy dose of uncomfortable situations as a test of both their ability to resist and their ability to function as a team. Although the resistance portion lasted 2.5 days, it seemed like an eternity because of the sleep deprivation. But there was one event that Steve and his classmates got to experience that would forever stand out in his mind. Late during the third day of captivity, the level of stress intensified to a crescendo.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?